Hi there, Jeep owners. Today in your 2017 Jeep Grand Cherokee, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Roadmaster's diode wiring kit. There's 5 different kits available here at Taillight.com for your diode wiring, and they're all basically the same, with the only difference being the type of connections that you're going to be using with them. There is a kit that comes with no connector or cable, so if you want to set your own full setup, you can go with that and you'll get your diodes and your wiring. But there's also ones with a 4-pole flat trailer connector, which you'll have here at the front of your vehicle, and it'll come with a 4-pole flat trailer to plug to your vehicle. And then there's 3 different kits that use a 6-pole connector at the front of the vehicle and come with a 6 to 7-way cable. These 3 different kits, the only difference between those is the type of 7-way cable that you're going to get, the 6 to 7-way cable. You can either get a straight cable, so it's going to be completely straight, and this is great if you've got channels in your tow bar. That keeps everything nice and neat, and you can run it through those channels. We also have coiled cables, which are great if you don't have channels in your tow bar. And lastly, we have a hybrid cable, which is what we're using today. That is both a straight and a coil, and this is great if you have channels in your tow bar, but you may have an extended distance, particularly if you're using high-low adapters with your setup. You may need a slight coiled end here to ensure you've got the distance you need without having it dangle down on the road. There's 5 main components you'll need when flat towing your vehicle behind your motorhome. You'll need your tow bar, which is the connection point between your motorhome and your vehicle. You'll need your safety cables, which is a supplemental connection in addition to your tow bar. You'll need your base plate, which is the connection point on your vehicle that your tow bar will attach to. You'll also need your diode wiring, which will take all the lighting signals from our motorhome and transfer them to the lights on our vehicles. People behind us know our intentions when going down the road. And lastly, you'll need your supplemental braking system, which will apply the brakes on our vehicle when we hit the brakes in our motorhome. A diode wiring kit is going to allow the signals from our motorhome to be transferred back here to the lights at the back of our vehicle. You can see we've got the left turn signal on in the motorhome, and it's being mimicked here on our vehicle. The diodes that are installed are going to be behind your taillight assembly here, and they'll go in line with your existing lighting wiring. But what this does is it allows our motorhome signals to go to our lights, but not backfeed, because our diodes act as a one-way check valve for electricity. It lets it get to our bulbs to light them up, but it can't go back to the rest of our circuitry and affect any issues that it may cause there. And this is my personal favorite setup for a flat tow, is using the diode wiring, because it looks like just a factory vehicle. We just plug it in the front and we're good to go. A few other options that you'll have is magnetic lighting, which you will have to set up every time, and you'll stick the lights on top. They do have a magnetic surface to hold them in place, and some people like to put them on the sides. It just depends on where you've got the best magnetic surface. The issue with those is that you do have to set it up every time. You often have wires that are running on top of your vehicle, in and out of windows. It's just kind of a hassle. But it is a great option if you've got multiple vehicles that you want to flat tow with, so you can move it from one vehicle to another. But if you've only got one, I highly recommend this. The other option is bulb and socket, and with a lot of our modern vehicles, the bulb and socket kit just isn't going to work. Most of them are LEDs, and the assemblies are very tightly compact with components, and there often just isn't enough room in there for that bulb. The other thing I don't like about the bulb and socket is you do have to drill a hole into the backside of your assembly to add an additional bulb to it, which you're going to be illuminating. The nice thing about this, though, is that you have no circuitry tapped into on your vehicle. Since you're adding an additional bulb, you're only putting wires to that bulb that you added, not touching any of the other wires. We'll begin our installation at the front of the vehicle. One of the first things you'll notice is that the fascia is removed, because we just got done installing our base plate, and this is the best time to install your diode wiring, because you've got all these components removed and it makes it significantly easier. Our connector at the front here is going to be mounted in the bracket that came with our base plate. So that's where we need our wiring to start. And from here we're going to route it to the back towards our taillight assembly so we can connect in at the back and hook up our diodes. From our bracket, we just wrap around the bumper and we follow our factory wiring down the side here. Next to our headlight here, we run through the opening right there. It's a little bit below the headlight. It comes out at the bottom of our washer bottle there, and we follow that forward underneath our air intake here. And it comes out right here. Now you do notice that there are some connections here. We routed it up in our engine compartment like this so we could tap in our braking system. So if you do have a braking system that you'll need to access these wires, I highly recommend routing it up. If your braking system doesn't, then you could just route it all the way along the bottom. But again, our customer did have that braking system, so we needed to access this. To make it easy, we put it here. And from there we go towards the firewall And once we get here at the back, at the firewall, we go straight down. And there's actually a brake line that runs straight down, and we followed next to that brake line because it runs behind a heat shield, and we want to protect our wiring from our exhaust, so we also stay behind that heat shield. You'll be able to see it a little bit better. We're going to lift it up in the air now so you can see what it looks like underneath, where it comes out. We're now underneath, and you can see this is the heat shield that we were talking about, where our brake line runs underneath, and you can see our wiring here. To get it through this heat shield, what we used was a piece of airline tubing. You do get airline tubing with many of your braking systems. If you are installing one of those, you can use that. If not, another great option is a metal coat hanger. You can unwind it and poke back up in here and use that to hook onto your wire and pull it down. From here, though, we just follow underneath the vehicle, following our brake lines. We stay above this shield here. You can just poke the wire in. There's openings here on the side, so you can easily poke it in and then just grab it to continue pulling your wire. We keep the wire tucked up underneath this panel all the way till we get to the back here. There's an opening in the back of our panel right here, and this is where our wire comes out, and it runs along the side of the fuel tank here. We stay above our fuel filler neck, and we stay above the straps as well. We zip tied it to the factory wiring here at the back of our fuel tank, and then routed it above our rear suspension, making sure to stay above any of the hoses and wiring so it doesn't drop down and get tangled up in our rear axle. We come out of the rear suspension here at the back, and we zip tie it to our wiring along the way. One of the things you'll notice here is that our white wire, we cut off the rest of the white wire going towards the rear of the vehicle, because we're going to use some of this white wire as a jumper to go from one side over to the other side, because our brown wire needs to go to both. So we can use a section of this white wire to do so, because this is just our ground wire, and we're just going to be hooking it with a self-tapping screw right into the bottom of the frame here. So what we'll do with our white wire now is we're going to strip back the end of the wire. You'll receive a ring terminal with your kit. We're going to crimp that on the end here. If you twist the wire, it can be a little easier to slide the ring terminal on. We'll then crimp it in place. And we'll use the included self-tapping screw to run it right into the bottom of the frame here. And we're using an 8mm socket for the included screw. Make sure it's nice and snug, it doesn't move. So we've got our ground connection completed. We're going to continue routing our wire now. So this is all except for the white wire section that we had taken out. And we just follow our factory wiring around to the outside of the frame here. And from here is where we go up to our driver's side taillight assemblies. To go up, we are going to have to remove those assemblies, so we'll show you how to get those out now. To remove our taillight assembly, there are 2 push pins we need to remove here at the back. If you open up your lift gate, it'll reveal these. We'll take our screwdriver, and there's a little slit on these that we just stick our screwdriver in the little opening there, and then we give a little twist on our screwdriver, and that'll pop out the center. We can then just pull it out of there. Sometimes just the center pops out. If it does, you can just pull out the rest after that, because the center is what locks it in place. We're then going to do the same thing for our other pin here. Then we can pull the whole assembly rearward to remove it. Now that we've got it removed, there are 3 connectors in the back we'll need to unplug. With all of them, you're going to push the red locking tab out first, and then you can press it on the release tab to pull it off. We can now set that aside, and then we're going to remove our passenger tail light in the same way. We've now pulled up our wiring, and one of the things you're going to notice here is that you see white wire, but you don't see the green wire. And that's because when we got to the back before we routed the wiring up, we separated out the green wire because that'll only go over to our passenger side. This white wire here is the section that we had cut earlier, where we hooked the front section to ground up there, and this is the rest of it right here, because this is going to go across to jumper our brown wire over. We're going to need these 2 connectors here, the 2 black connectors. The larger one is your stop and turn circuit, and the smaller one is your taillight circuit. So with both of these, we don't want the black wire, we want the colored one. On our driver's side here, our brake and turn is going to be a white with orange, maybe even a beige color. It's kind of hard to distinguish it. And the other one is a white with gray. With both of these, we're going to cut just these 2 wires. So what we'll be doing is taking both of these wires, and we're going to cut both of them. Kind of keeping it kind of far away from the connectors so we can better maneuver around our diodes as necessary. Now that we've cut each one, we're going to strip back each end of these wires that we cut back. So we'll have 4 wires stripped in the end. We'll then take each one of these wires and we're going to crimp a blue spade terminal on the end of these. The wires that we routed up then, we are going to strip back each one of these. And now we're going to crimp a blue spade terminal onto the yellow wire. And you'll receive 1 yellow spade terminal in your kit, and that one is going to go on the brown and white wires that we're twisting together here. Because again, the brown wires are taillight circuit, but we need to transfer that over to the other side. So we'll be using a portion of this white wire. That's why we receive 1 larger spade terminal, so it can accept multiple wires. Now that we've got everything connected over here on this side, we can start hooking up our diodes. Your diode has 2 ins and a single out. The out is always going to go towards your bulb, or your LEDs, which is always going to be the connector end here that plugs into the assembly. So we're going to plug that in there. And since we're working with our stop-turn circuit, the white-orange wire here, the other end is going to plug right back in to an orange-white wire to complete this circuit once again. But now we're going to add in our new wires that we ran up. And since this is stop-turn circuit, we're going to be using the yellow wire to connect to this diode. Our other diode is going to work fairly similarly. We're going to connect the out to the connector side. The in is going to connect back to our wire to recomplete that circuit that we cut. And lastly, we're going to take the yellow spade terminal, that's for our stop taillight circuit, with the brown and the white wires on it, and plug it in there. Now that we've got all of our connections made over here, the green wire and the white wire that we had cut a section out of, we're going to route over to the passenger side where we can make our connections over there. So now we're underneath the vehicle, and here you can see this is the complete wiring and everything. Here's the remaining white wire that is going off to our passenger side, as well as the green wire going off to the passenger side. When we routed it over, all we did was stick it behind these pillars just above our bumper beam to keep our wiring up off the ground, and we just did that all the way across and used the same trick with a pull wire to get it up behind the passenger side taillight. Over here on the passenger side, we did basically the same thing. We used the wires from the large black connector and the small black connector. The large one is still our stop-turn circuit, and it's also that white with kind of beige-ish orange color. Our taillight on this side is going to be white with this is definitely a nice bright orange colored. So these hook up the same way. We cut the wires, we put our spade terminals on, and our diodes went in between. For the stop-turn circuit, we used the green wire that we had run back to connect to the in on that one, and we talked about the white wire already being our jumper for our taillight circuit going in line between our small connectors diode. At this point now we can reinstall our taillight assembly. One of the things I did do is on each of our diodes we do have an adhesive backing. I peeled those off and stuck the 2 diodes together to keep them from clinking around against each other. You can stick it to the walls and stuff, but due to the very limited space we've got back here, you're going to be hard pressed to find a place where you can stick it and it's going to fit. There's a little cavity kind of here next to this connector, and that's where I recommend you kind of just keep your diodes at, so that way you can push the assembly back in. It is going to be a tight fit. You might have to check those diodes a couple of times just to make sure they're staying in that little cavity so it'll all fit. With the assembly pushed back in, we can now reinstall our pins. So you're just going to push those in, and then when you push the center in, it locks it in place. We'll then install the other side the same way. We can now begin hooking our connector up here at the front. This is going to depend on your base plate. Certain base plates may pass through the bumper, in which you would want to wait till you get your fascia reinstalled before you hook up your connector, and some may be behind it and you'll cut out a hole to access it afterwards. This one's going to be pretty flush with our bumper, so we're going to be okay to hook it up now. First thing we're going to want to do is cut off the excess wire. And another thing I want to point out is that you see a red wire here. We're going to be hooking this one up, but this is not part of our kit. This is a charge line wire, which is an additional accessory you can get here at Taillight.com that will work with a 6-pole connector, so you can charge your vehicle's battery as you're pulling it down the road. So we're going to take the excess that we don't need and cut that off. And once you've got that done, we'll need to separate out each one of these wires. This kit was the 4-pole, but our customer opted to upgrade to a 6-pole, so we had cut the 4-pole end off. And in most cases, a 6-pole is what you want, because with a 4-pole, you're only going to have your lighting circuits, and you won't be able to add any additional accessories. And our customer wanted that charge line. Once you've got them all cut, we're just going to peel each one back a little bit, just to make it easier to make our connections. They do just pull apart, it is a little tight. And once we've got all of those separated, we can strip each one of these back. And if you've got any other accessories, you might as well strip those back too, because you'll want to hook everything up here at the same time. We'll then take our 6-pole connector. Our 6-pole connector came with our tow bar, but if you've got one of the kits that has a coiled, straight, or hybrid 6 to 7-pole connector, you'll receive this with your wiring kit. Before we hook it up though, we want to take the dust boot off the back of our connector, and we're going to slide that dust boot over all of our wires here. And this guy can actually poke right on the other side of that, and that'll be just fine. It'll keep it out of our way. If you twist your wires, it'll make them easier to connect into the back side of your connector. And then we've got our connector here. You have several open pins here that we can make connections to. We're only going to be using certain ones. They are all labeled. There are little lettering on there for each one. So we're going to be using the ones labeled GD, which is here, and it's your ground wire, which is going to be the white one. We're going to be using the one labeled TM, which is our tail lights and is our brown wire. We'll skip the one labeled S. We're going to go on to the one labeled RT for right turn, which is the green wire. The one labeled LT, which is left turn, which is our yellow wire. And if you are adding a charge line circuit, we are going to add that to our center pin here. So you'll still have one open slot for an additional accessory if you wanted to add one in the future. We're then just going to take each wire and poke it in and screw the screws back down. We're going to start where we stopped. We're just going to continue in that same order we did. So grounds first. That was our white wire. We're going to poke it in, screw it back down, and we're just going to follow around in the order, attaching our wire colors to the appropriate location. Now that we've made all of our connections, before we close everything up and get it mounted, we're going to use some dielectric grease on the back side here, and this is going to help seal it in and protect our circuits. You can get some here at Taillight.Com, and we're going to be pretty generous with it because we want this to be all sealed in to keep any moisture out of here to ensure we have a long-lasting connection. We can then push our connector through, slide our dust boot on the back, and then I like to use just a little bit of electrical tape just to seal up that connector on each end and ensure that it doesn't slide off of there. We can now go ahead and secure our connector to our mounting bracket, and this is going to vary depending upon your base plate. Typically the mounting brackets come with the base plate as well as the hardware to attach it. So ours comes with a bolt, lock washer, and nut, but many of them out there, such as Roadmaster and Blue Ox, if you're using one of their base plates, they will have self-tapping screws typically that mounts into their mounting location. Once we've got them started, we can tighten them down. The hardware that came with our Demco base plate is going to be an 11mm socket and wrench. You do receive some wire loom with your kit, and you can put this wherever you'd like. I like to use it in any location where you can see the wiring, so that way it'll blend in and look very factory when you're done wrapped up in the loom. When you're going to install loom, if you kind of get it started and then you kind of peel back and you can just kind of roll it on like that. It can then slide down as necessary. Some of your little straggler wires don't like to cooperate. That's okay, we'll just push those in. And then I'm going to put a little tape on each end of this to also ensure that it stays in place. I've now plugged in our tester. You can plug yours into your motorhome and then verify if everything's working properly. You want to make sure that you have your left turn signal, right turn signal, tail lamps, and brake lamps. With everything working properly, we're ready to reinstall our fascia, finish up zip tying any loose wiring, and hook up to our motor and hit the road. Now before we can put our fascia back on, we are going to have to do some trimming in order for it to fit again. These air deflectors right here on each side, we're going to need to remove those. So we're just going to cut those off. You can use a cutoff wheel, a pair of snips, or we're using kind of like a tiny sawzall here to remove ours. Next, we need to trim out the opening where our tow hooks would go. Our vehicle didn't have tow hooks, so there's no opening here. If you did have tow hooks, this is likely already open and you don't need to trim it out. But since we do, we're going to be trimming it in a similar fashion. Since we're using that small cutting blade, we're going to drill a hole first so we have our starting point. And then we're just going to cut around, following this around. If you need to, you can put in another hole just so you can change your angles and things like that. At this point, I'm going to drill me another little hole so I can easily make that angle down. And since I know I'm going to need to, we're going to make one here at the bottom. Once you've got it cut all the way around, we can just knock that out of there. And any of these rough edges that we've got here on the inside, we can take a file to and just clean that up. With the one side cut out, I'm now just going to repeat that same process over here on the other side to cut this one out. So now that we've got our fascia trimmed out for our base plate, one of the things that you're going to have is your electrical connector bracket. And there's really not like a specific location that this bracket goes. You can choose to put it wherever you'd like. What I chose to do with this bracket was to take the ears here and I bent them at a 90-degree with the rear holes, and that allowed our connector bracket to kind of sit right like this. This is going to put it in the location where your mesh grill is between the area that we cut out. And I just ran it in with some self-tapping screws. Now again, you can put this wherever you'd like. If you do choose to put it here, then you can follow along with us. This is also where I mounted the breakaway switch for our braking system, as there's an additional hole on each side, so you can choose one side and put your breakaway switch right onto that as well. So we are going to have to cut out for our breakaway switch, and to be able to access this, if you mount yours in a different location, you'll just want to hold your fascia up and trim out around it. We're going to be doing that with ours, so you can follow along and see our hole in the end if you put it in the same spot. Ours is pretty well just centered right in the middle of the vehicle. So now we're going to set our fascia back into position. One of the things you might notice is on each side where our side trim piece was, I took just a piece of paper towel and kind of stuffed it between the trim piece and the fender. That'll just hold those trim pieces out to make it a little easier to get this back in place. We're then just going to hold it up, and then we're going to have to just check to see if we need, where we need to trim out for our electrical and breakaway switch. So we can see here the general location. This is actually going to be coming down further once we get it in. So this is kind of the bottom here. It's really going to sit probably closer to this area, but we are going to need to be able to trim out around it so that way we can get it in place. So we're going to trim there, here, trim there, and there. We're going to leave this section here and there. We're going to be taking out the sections here and here. Once we trim out for our breakaway switch here, we can then trim out for our electrical connector back there. For trimming out your grill, I recommend using snips because they work pretty darn good. So you can just get in there and just make a nice little cut right at each of those spots. We're just going to leave just that one and take it straight up here. So now that we've got all that cut out, you can clean off the white stuff with some alcohol. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it because I'm going to have to do a little bit more for our electrical connector, and I'll clean it up at the end. So we put our fascia back on, and it did clip into place this time. You can see there's our electrical connector there. So we are going to trim out right around it. We can even leave it here in place and just use these snips like we did before to cut out around it. You do want to keep in mind that this door here does need to flip up high enough for your connector to go under it. So you may need to take a little bit more out than you initially thought, but I recommend trimming first, testing the fit, and then trimming more later if you need to. And now we're just going to test it out. It is awfully hard to get in there. It does flip up, so it looks really nice, but you may want to trim some more just to make it a little bit easier to access this little connector here. And I would just recommend just trimming these. I'm going to go ahead and just finish trimming these off just because it's really difficult to flip that up. I don't want them to accidentally push it sideways and potentially cause some damage to the hinge up there. So make things easier on yourself. So we're just going to snip this right out of here. And now we're just going to go back and clean up any of the marks we'd made. We're just using some rubbing alcohol on a cloth to do so. It works pretty well on getting like a paint stick and stuff off like that. At this point now we can finish reinstalling our fascia in reverse order of how we removed it. When reinstalling your fascia, once you've got everything in, you did have a couple of rivets that we drilled out. You do get new rivets with your base plate to go in place. You will need a plastic rivet gun. You should be able to pick that up at your local hardware store. We're going to slide the rivet in. We're then going to slide that into the hole where our old rivet used to be, and we're just going to squeeze our rivet gun. When you let go of the rivet gun, you just kind of want to repeat this process, and that's going to pull the rivet nice and tight until it breaks the end off and holds it in place. The end that is then broke off in here, typically you can just take your next rivet and just push that out with it. So we're going to repeat this for the other rivet on this side, and then we're going to do this for the two on the other side. And that completes our installation of Roadmaster's diode wiring kit on our 2017 Jeep Grand Cherokee.